Due to the responsibility of the police to protect people, as well as the community's need to be able to trust the police, I agree with the resolution that the United States federal government should substantially increase the regulation of the state and or local police misconduct in the United States. All definitions will be contextual. If you have any questions, feel free to ask and cross-X. Observation 1, Resolutional Analysis. Implicit bias training reduces desperate policing outcomes. Definitions: racial profiling. When law enforcement and private security targets people for humiliating, often frightening detentions, interrogations, and searches without evidence of criminal activity and based on a perceived notion of race, ethnicity, national origin, and religion, as defined by American Civil Liberties Union. Implicit bias, a term of art referring to relatively unconscious and relatively automatic features of prejudged judgment and social behavior, as defined by Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. The type of resolution we'll be looking at is policy. We'll be looking at the benefits of alternative implicit bias training methods while looking at traditional implicit bias training methods. All right. Police officers are not immune to unintentional biases that they may hold that creates stereotypes and attitudes against people. For example, black men in criminality could lead people to evaluate ambiguous actions performed by non-whites as suspicious, and criminal identical actions performed by whites go as unnoticed. This is seen by a police departments going after crime from black people and stopping them at traffic stops, while most of the drug crime happens to be from white people. Observation 2, status quo. Implicit bias training alone does not solve issues of differences. So while the entire industry has been springing up on actual training of the police for implicit bias training, there has been little evidence that suggests that on their own they have an effect. In fact, there has been some backlash against implicit bias training procedures. In other words, we're not really confronting the police culture and the criminal justice, our media representation that are biased against certain groups. Like, these perceptions that we have are so persuasive that it's hard for someone to be able to look straight and not see them. So in rare cases, the community does not really get involved. The community itself isn't involved in these institutionalized biases that plague the police departments. So they're not really answering the questions that they're not really answering the questions of biases that need to be answered. B, the police and the community. B, the police and the community weigh in on traditional implicit bias training. On an episode of All Things Considered, police officials conversed with talk show host Friedel to talk about how implicit bias training has affected them. So all of the police officers do see that they have a need for implicit bias training, but most feel that it does not help and it backfires because that they have to take time being off of the streets. They do see that there is no benefit because the fact that no one can actually change their biases that they have. Observation 3, plan. Mandate 1. The United States should implement alternative implicit bias training courses for all police departments. Mandate 2. In addition to alternative implicit bias training courses, mindfulness practices should be introduced to all police officers. Mandate 3. Records should be kept for police community interactions. For example, location, race. Funding. The cost of implicit bias training will offset the amount of desperate outcomes, which the community's trust in the police locks up less black people and ignores other avenues of crime. Enforcement. All stations will have clerical personnel keep up with training needs of staff. Staffs will be required to take 2 classes and 10 community service hours yearly, and are face unpaid vacation until required training is accomplished. Observation 5. Solvency. Training police with the community will help rebuild trust and uncover biases. After the Fayetteville shooting, programs were set up so police could address the issues of the community not being able to trust them. What this police department has done was set up police officers from the dispatch units to run the actual training seminars. And what they did is they ensured that they worked within the community. They did community service hours with homeless people to see how that they lived and how that they were going about and what the perception. They were able to personalize them as people and see them as people by hanging out with them and seeing their actual plights without actually working with a badge on. It also trained on body language and how the body language of police could be perceived by the community. B. How bias training works in one campus police department. One campus police department decided to use the community together to use as a workshop. So what they did is they invited the community to the implicit bias training courses and allowed people to voice their opinions without backlash from police. Police were actually able to also state their perceptions on why they felt the way they felt, so the community was also able to see their biases towards the police. And so it created this open environment for the police to actually communicate with the community and see exactly how they are affecting them by their actions. This is a mandatory workshop for new officers, and officers have to redo it every single year. And so this program has seen any visible benefits yet, but it has seen the fact that the community has started being able to have pride in their police department and put trust back into their police department. C. Dark innocence. Retaining police with mindfulness practice to aid in squilling implicit bias. A professor says biasing police has negative impacts on the community and leads to inefficient policing. And finally, this section seeks to provide officers with tools to avoiding biased policing through better controlling of their automatic behavioral responses. Bringing mindfulness into police training is when police act in high stressful situations. They could act on two concepts. Conditioning or neuroplasticity. Conditioning is what happens when police, what they deal with on a day-to-day, what they have been trained. Neuroplasticity means that ability to be flexible with your mind in conscious effort. So it grants you more empathy and non-judgment so that the practitioner could observe and contribute without actually personalizing the events before him. This allows more clarity within the mind. He could notice his onset responses and see them. This way, there is no way that no amount of mindfulness practice could eliminate an emergency response, but mindfulness practice could allow the practitioner to be more control of his responses to stimuli. So his perception won't guide his responses and will ultimately divert him from a desperate outcome. Approaching people of various ethnicities is an unbiased and mindful way and a key component to equal treatment of people of color in the criminal justice system. It helps officers be aware of hidden biases and privileges of white communities that inefficiently affect policing in areas.